Welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Hiring. We're excited to be here with Kate Michael of Holganix, and we'll turn it over to her for a second because you will do a far better job of giving your background, although we were having a lot of fun backstage, if you will. But as we get prepared to do that, one thing, if you just drop in the chat if you can. First of all, this will be very interactive. So if you have questions, we encourage you to drop them into the chat. We often will reference those and pivot our discussion on the basis of what you want to see. But let's start with from where you are joining. So what part of the world are you joining from? I know we have the Midwest well represented between Josh and Kate, and I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. But if you can just drop that in there. And while that's happening, Kate, thank you again. We've had the luxury of being able to spend some time with Kate over the last month or so. She's been very generous with her time and sharing her expertise and experience with us. And so we couldn't help but ask her back to talk about this, especially now as we sit here firmly in the fourth quarter, as a lot of people are looking ahead to 2026 and planning. Thought that her experience here in the last couple of organizations would really be insightful for people to learn from. So Kate, without further ado, provide us a quick background for the team, the 60 seconds on you, and then a little bit about Holganix so they've got some context.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. And I really appreciate the time and opportunity to speak with both of you. I think that for me, my background, I grew up in central Iowa in the seed industry, and my mom has been in the seed industry for her entire career. And so I kind of got to see, what the seed industry was all about, and grew up in kind of farmland and had kind of an interesting perspective. I wanted to go to law school, and I thought, maybe that was my path. And then I kind of got pulled into some seed industry work, and I loved it, and it just felt like home. And so for my entire career, the past almost, 15 years, I've been in seed and agriculture. My most recent role was with an ag tech company. And so we did like drone scouting. And then I joined Holganix, and Holganix is a soil health company. We help growers improve the soil and improve the revenue and thrivability of their business. And we do it by creating like a stronger soil structure, putting biology back into the soil, and creating healthier, stronger plants. And so my job here is to hire really great people, put them in jobs that they can be really successful in, and let them make a big impact. And so I use Spark Hire to do that every day. And I've had the opportunity to build out a lot of processes and plans that have helped put Holganix in a good position to succeed in the future. And a lot of that has been due to the fact that I have the time and ability to focus on some things by utilizing the Spark Hire platform.
That's awesome. And one thing that I know you've shared with us in the past that I think is really good context for folks is just the niche nature of the industry, right? And what does that therefore mean in terms of looking for talent and where that talent may live? And I guess share with us a little bit about that, because I think that's important context for as we think about process and technology and things like that.
Yeah. So the beautiful thing about farming is that it happens in the flyover states, right? So we're not really central to just one location. I have reps throughout the Midwest. I have locations throughout the Midwest. I'm located in the Midwest. And so we're able to really, build out teams, here locally. And I think that, utilizing the ability to build out our locations or build out the recs in, our remote locations has been a really huge plus for us.
Yep. Josh, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I muted myself for the intro and it never came off mute. Well, hi, everybody. Well, Kate, I think it'd be really helpful. First of all, thank you for the support. But second, it'd be really helpful just to frame up the context around Holganix. How big is the company in terms of employees, maybe different types of positions that you guys generally recruit for, and then just the makeup of the HR/recruiting function, like who's all involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So Holganix is an independently owned business. Um, and we have, I would say, between 80 75 to 80 employees today. My estimate and plans put us over 100 employees probably by the end of the first quarter of 26. So rapidly growing. And, I think for us, um, we're hiring sales folks in the field. We're hiring, middle kind of people managers in the field. We have some operations roles. We have roles that are on site. So people who are, in the warehouses, shipping product, or logistics folks who are in the office and, kind of handling some details there. Um, we're hiring roles up into like upper management. And so just a wide variety of the type of roles that we're hiring and the locations. We're not all in a physical location. And so there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of different places where we're looking.
And
Yeah.
when you joined the business, what was the catalyst for that? Because I believe you're the company's first
I
full-time person
am.
in talent acquisition.
Yeah. So you're right. So the team for us, we have one full-time employee who's handling the HR function. We have two consultants who are working with us on some HR functions. And then previously, before I joined the company, the hiring process was really handled by the hiring managers, our chief of operations, our chief of revenue, and then also the HR function. And so everyone was kind of coming together to really try to make hiring a success. And they all had a lot of success. They brought in some really great people, but they all also had like really core business functions that they needed to focus more time on. And so when I was able to have a conversation with the company, I think for me, it was just about how do we build a better process? How do we streamline this so that it works more effectively and efficiently? You have these huge goals for growth, and what an exciting place to be in the industry today, right? There's not a lot of companies in agriculture that are growing this rapidly. And so how do we make that more effective and efficient for you? How do we bring in really, really great talent? But how do we give you the time back to focus on your core business objectives and let me focus on hiring and building this team out for you? Let me take some of that off of your plate. And ultimately, I think that plea was successful. And so I got to join the team. And I've had the amazing opportunity to really help them build out the team and bring in some phenomenal people. And we'll continue to do that.
That's great.
Yeah, and so this actually is a great segue for as we think about this. So the a lot of organizations here, like we brought at the beginning here, we said at 2025 and looking ahead to 26, and it's a natural time to kind of reflect on what works, what maybe doesn't work so well. But I think in a lot of cases, it's while everybody would deem it necessary, it gets really easy to push that off, and then all of a sudden you wake up and it's Christmas morning and you haven't done it, and you got to come right back and fire off in 26. So you were fortunate enough to have the opportunity to be dropped into that situation and now have to really assess, because that's why you were brought in. So when you did that, like, how did you actually go about assessing, okay, where are we? Like, where do we stand from a process perspective, and all the different stakeholders involved, including candidates, and then obviously technology being part of that process? How did you go about doing that?
Yes. So when I started with Holganix, we had an HIRS system that had a sort of a platform for hiring. It was maybe a little adaptive, and lacked some functionality. And so that process or that platform had been kind of being built. And so there was some things that were glaringly missing from it, but then there was also just some functionality that I wasn't quite sure if we would ever get to the point where it would do the things I needed it to do. And I had the ability to really come in and luckily be able to say, okay, we're going to build some processes around, these certain areas. And there were processes that were working, but there were processes that were maybe a little clunky or maybe a little slow or maybe a little manual, that I had the good fortune to kind of feel fast on. And so I'm not a very patient person. That's probably my fatal flaw. And so I was able to really identify areas where, in order to be successful, I needed to get extremely efficient in a few areas. And in order to improve our candidate experience, I needed to get really efficient in a few areas. And I was able to communicate those and kind of have some conversations around, this is what I need. This is where we're at today, but I'm not sure what we have today can get there.
Mhm.
And I've probably told this story 60 times, and I'm sure everyone's tired of hearing it. But I had the good fortune of having a CEO who's incredibly intelligent, but he's also really empowering, and he gives us the autonomy to be successful and to make the decisions that we need to make. And so I said, I'm just not sure that this platform can get me where I want to go. I know of a platform that can do all of the things that I need. Is there a way? And he said, do it. And I was like, but I have this whole list of reasons, and I have all the numbers together. And like, you don't want to know any of my rationale. And he said, no, just take care of it. Just do it. Do what you need to do to be successful. And so I was actually able to reach out to Spark Hire and say, this is something that we're really interested in. Within I think a day, I had a meeting. The meeting was phenomenal. Within another day, I had Sonia, who's been my implementation lead and someone I've worked really, really closely with. And I would say by the end of that week, I was actively building out requisitions on Spark Hire and, pulling candidates in, and we made that transition. We were able to build things very, very quickly. We made that transition very, very quickly. In my previous role, Spark Hire was something that they were using. So I was able to learn the system, but I didn't necessarily get to build it. And I had the good fortune here to be able to actually take the blank canvas and say, okay, this is how I want this to look. And this is how I want this to read. This is the workflow I want here. I could really customize everything to exactly how I wanted it to be built out. And so I really enjoyed that. And the process happened very, very quickly.
Yeah. And so you actually referenced that. So you had the benefit of having previous experience with it, and then having exposure to, in this case specifically, Spark Hire Recruit, the applicant tracking system, so that when you came into Holganix, you already knew where you wanted to be, like what good looked like. I think a lot of organizations may not have that background, right? That they don't have the luxury of either having previous experience with an applicant tracking system, or the one with which they have experience was, as you pointed out earlier, some that are a part of the HRIS system are fine to kind of get started, but they lack a lot of the horsepower necessary to really drive an efficient process and amplify your capabilities. So in that situation, as you think about, because in your head, you'd already kind of mapped out okay, I see where the bottlenecks are. For those that don't have that, how would you recommend, okay, just break down the process, and here's the places where it can most often go awry as we think about the candidate experience or hiring manager capabilities, or, effectively screening 100 resumes for a role? Where are the kind of the hot spots for you?
Yeah. So for me, one of the biggest pieces was the communication and just how that impacts the candidate experience, and how I knew that I could do a better job with communication. But my prior system didn't necessarily have the capabilities to make that very streamlined or very effective or efficient. And so I was having to, pull a email address out of the system and put it into my Outlook, and then compose the email and then send the email. But then no one who was within that system could see what I had sent, or when I had sent it, or what the response was. And so then if I wanted to make sure that, the whole group was aware, because we hire as a team, it's not just my opinion, right? I'm bringing people in and I'm screening them and I'm having really good conversations and I'm kind of setting the stage. But then I need this entire group of super intelligent people to also buy in. And for us, it was, how do we communicate more effectively, improve the customer experience? And then how do we improve our internal communication? How do we make sure that we're not all having the same conversation 6 times and wasting our time? How do we make sure that we're all aware of our thoughts on this candidate? Or I always joke with the team, but like, if you want to know how I really feel, look at that further review box, because I'm going to give you all of the context, and I want you to be able to read through my notes and know when you start that next conversation, it's not a like repeat of the conversation that we had previously. Let's build off of that, and let's take our time and be intentional about being able to dig deeper with each interview as we move through the process.
Yeah.
And so for me, those were 2 areas that were really time consuming, and they were really important, and they were really clunky. And so I knew that making those processes a little bit more streamlined, but also just improving the communication internally among our team, we were going to feel so much more confident in making those decisions. We were going to feel so much more confident in those hires. We were able to, if my CEO wants to know what's going on in hiring, he doesn't have to call me and say, hey, Kate, where are we at? We've got all of these roles open. He can just click in and see what's going on. He can see my comments. He can see, the chief revenue's comments. He can see all of the things that have kind of told the story of this hiring process, so that he can feel really confident when we're making these hires as well. And so that's been such a big piece for us, is improving the efficiency, but improving that internal communication has been absolutely key.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You bring up a lot of points there. It's like the communication piece of it, right? But it's not, it's external to the candidate. It's internal with each other. And then it's making it all visible, because as you suggested, and this is what we see in especially small to medium-sized companies, is it's almost always a team sport.
Absolutely.
Right? Because there's a lot of other subject matter experts that need to be involved in addition to the hiring manager. But then you also brought up the visibility and communication at an executive level, right? For people who aren't even in the process, is that the ability to make that more transparent, so that they have the confidence and they can weigh in and see that. So really interesting dynamic, and helpful, I think, for people as we think about, okay, where do I even begin to evaluate my process? It's almost like we'll go through these places and start to map out what has to happen, and the systems that are involved, and the time it takes. And it's, to your point, just as much about the time efficacy, but if it takes a lot of time, imagine what that's doing to the candidate.
That's
And
exactly right.
and the candidate, where does the candidate fit in all that? And they end up going someplace else because we just couldn't get, all the dots to connect fast enough.
Absolutely. I think there's a point that I missed on that as well, that I think is worth discussing, and it's just the reporting externally piece too. So my team works really, really closely on bringing in really good people, but the executive team has a huge, vested interest in ensuring that we're being effective and efficient and bringing in really good people, and having the reporting piece of the tool, right? All of my candidates are in this tool. I don't have candidates sitting in 16 different platforms, or, some in my inbox and some in a job board and some in LinkedIn. Everything is connected. It's integrated. They're all sitting in one spot. I'm moving them through the process. All of that is being tracked, measured, accounted for. And I can take all of that information and I can send that externally to make sure that, the people who have a vested interest in what we're doing understand and have the visibility to see how the process is working. And so that reporting piece was huge for me as well.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to go back to, and I think this ties into it perfectly, is that's really the shift from recruiting being something that everybody owns, that's hiring manager led, to being an actual strategic function of the business where executives care about it and they want to see reporting and all that kind of stuff. But if we go back to you thinking about making a change in the hiring software that you're using and the processes that you're running, it all goes back to the hiring managers that were mostly leading their own processes to begin with, and oftentimes can be quite resistant to change, because why try and fix something that in their minds maybe is not broken? and they know what they know. And it's been working well for the most part for the organization, up to that time when you came in, and obviously the business was making a shift in where you guys wanted to go. So, or you knew where you wanted to get the organization to, you knew what tech could help you do it. And you could, of course, show them once you got there, but that's, once you get there. So how do you, like, bringing it back to the start of the process, how do you start that journey with your hiring managers when it's this transition from you used to own the process, meaning hiring managers, and now that ownership is on your plate and you want to make these changes and you need to get them bought in to work with you on implementing those changes, whether it be process or tech?
Yeah. So I think I maybe was in a little bit of a unique experience in the fact that our company was growing so very quickly, that the hiring managers were like, take it, take it and run with it, right? Like, we have so many things to do and we have so many places to go. And like, this is just one big thing that sits on our plate every week, but we don't maybe have the capacity to really do it justice. And so I was able to kind of come in and say, okay, I see where you're spending a lot of time. I want to own this process for you. I want to make this more effective and free you up to take care of things that are really important to your core business, right? And then let this be my problem. I still want you involved in the process, but I don't want it to be overwhelming or extremely manual. I want you to just be able to, kind of play your part, give me the feedback, and then I'll run with it. And I think that was a relief, honestly. But there was also I went through a process of explaining the expectations and how the system worked and where they could find information and all of the benefits of having, the recruit tool to really like utilize effectively for them. And it was, like 2 minutes into me showing them around and kind of giving them a demo. They're like, this is great. This is wonderful. We love it. And I was like, yeah, there's so many pieces of this where, my expectations of you are to have this interview. I'll schedule the interview. I'll take care of the logistics of the interview. I need you to attend the interview. I need you to have some conversations. I can give you, some options for questions or direction on, how this interview needs to go. You can read my feedback to understand, the context of, what that first conversation looked like. You have the resume right here for the context of who this person is and what they've done. You've got all of this information in one screen. And then I just need you to click the button and evaluate the candidate and tell me what you think so that I can handle the next step for you. And it was like, that's all you want? I'm great. Yeah, let's do it. This is super effective. And then we get to the end of the process and we do what we call a team sync. And it's something that we've implemented that just says, okay, all of the stakeholders need to come back together for 15 minutes. We have all of the feedback and we need to make a plan on the direction that we're headed that everybody's really bought into and we can keep moving. And prior to having all of the information in the recruit tool, that was like a 30 to 45 minute meeting because you had to kind of still collect all the feedback and everybody was trying to like remember who this candidate was and how that conversation went and what their thoughts were. And it was a little bit jumbled and it kind of took some time to unpack. Now that's a 15-minute conversation. It's really just us all clapping for each other and telling, like, this is so exciting. We can't wait for this person to come onto the team. Like, this is going to be so wonderful. Sometimes there's some contract, discussion in that meeting, but it's 15 minutes where we're like, this is so great. Congratulations to the hiring manager. We're so excited to have this person on the team. Let's go make the offer and close the deal. And so because we have all of that information pulled together, we are so confident about the decision that we're making. It's timely information. So, we're not trying to remember back, a week ago or 10 days ago. And we can speed the process up so much because we are really confident in the decisions that we're making because we're making those decisions based on all of this information that we've gathered and pulled together in one place. Yeah. So I think the hiring managers love it. I think that, they're looking at this as a tool for effectiveness and efficiency for them. And I think that it has made them so much more confident, which is really a huge deal for them.
Yep. And I think the thing that stands out to me from one of our previous conversations, you mentioned the culture at the organization around domain expertise and really owning your domain. And that was obviously a big reason why you were brought into the business, as somebody needed to own recruiting as a domain of the business, rather than like a side project for a hiring manager to do.
Sure.
And so what I'm hearing from you is the big way to get hiring managers on board is to emphasize just that, hey, in recruiting, like, this is my domain expertise. I'm here to build a process and make things more efficient for you as a hiring manager, so you can focus on your domain expertise, which is your day-to-day job.
Mhm.
But I need to put processes and tools in place that allow us to leverage your domain expertise as part of hiring as a team to ultimately get to the best outcome. And so I think that's, at least, that's what I'm hearing, is how you kind of connected everything for hiring managers and made it all click. And that's why they're so, active and engaged in the hiring process.
I think that's true. We call them guardrails a lot, right? Like the process and the workflow and the way that everything's laid out in the recruit tool gives you a very visual look at what absolutely has to happen before we get to the hiring or like offer stage, right? And all of these things can happen very, very quickly if they need to, or they can happen in like a normal cadence if they need to, but all of the things have to happen. And so I kind of think about this as like the guardrails, right? We know what has to happen. We can move fast through it if we need to. But we're all bought into that process because it is so, intuitive, and it's laid out clearly and the expectations are managed. And so I think that we're really setting the hiring managers up to succeed. And ultimately, that's all they really want, right? They just want to be really good at the job. They just want to have a really good team that's, blowing it out of the water in sales. And by hiring effectively, they can get there. They can do all of those things. My ops guys, they just want to be really operationally efficient. They can do that when they bring really good people into the business who add value immediately and know what they're doing and can, take pieces of this and run with it. And in order to do that, they have to hire really effectively. They have to bring in really good people. So if we make them more effective up front, they're more effective down the road. And who doesn't want that? They all want to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And we've heard you talk about a few different stakeholders in this decision to move to recruit, upgrade HR tech, implement new processes. We've heard exec leadership,
Mhm.
which sounds great. And we just talked about hiring managers. The third stakeholder, which you've also touched on, is the candidates. Now, they're not a stakeholder in the sense of they have a decision in the tools you use or the process that you run, but it's a major consideration in those things that you select
Absolutely.
and design. And it'd be helpful, just for the group here, to just frame up why that matters so much, especially as it relates to Holganix, from our previous conversations about just agriculture community and, how it's so important to really deliver a good candidate experience, and, why that's got to be a big consideration as you think about what tech you're using and processes you're running.
Yeah. So I think when we think about candidates as a stakeholder, it's an obligation. I have an obligation to our candidates to put them through a process that's fair, that's straightforward, that's honest, that provides feedback, that even if they're no longer being considered for the role, that they're aware of that and that they have that clarity so that they can continue to move on and focus on other roles. And so, for us, it's about our culture and how we go to market and how we interact with the industry. It's about, a creator mindset and owning this space and also owning the decisions that we're making, but being loving and kind and fair to our candidates, and so that they're aware of where they stand today and what the next steps look like. I think for us, it's about being able to have those guardrails in place to speed up the process when we need to, or, continue with a normal cadence when it's necessary, but not dragging out the process over 3 months or, 6 weeks or whatever the timeline needs to look like. And so we're fair to candidates and we're fair to the people who are kind of putting their trust in us to build a great work environment. And so, I see that as an obligation. It's a huge piece of, what our core values look like, and being very transparent in that process. And then I think that there's also, you've kind of touched on agriculture as a market. 2%, it's less than 2% now of people in the United States are actively farming. It's like less than 5% who work in agriculture. So the market of folks that I really want to hire that are really great people who really fit our culture, it's kind of a small, subset of what industry looks like in the US. And in order for me to be really successful, we have to have a great reputation as a company that you want to work for, as, someone who has a fair hiring process, who, is aware of the biases and does everything that they can to ensure that those biases aren't, a consideration, or that they're addressed and handled appropriately. And just that we do a great job to make sure that people feel heard and valued and seen, whether we hire them or not.
So that, I think that we're starting to see this rubric come together. So we've talked a little bit about the business case that you prepared but never had to share, which was a great. That's poetry.
Yeah, I was so disappointed.
yeah, it's probably still sitting on your shelf, ready to go, proverbial shelf. But I think it would be helpful to kind of walk through that a little bit, because we have the benefit of working with a lot of different companies who are evaluating technology in this case, which as a result brings process change, right? That's why we buy technology, right? Is for those improvements and those enhancements for all those various stakeholders. And what we find is that a lot of times people come into the equation with a recognition that there are things that need improving, but they haven't done a great job of defining the actual problem and then actually connecting it to business impact. So we hear a lot about time savings and efficiency, but you start to draw some of this out in terms of, well, what does that mean in terms of implications for the candidate? What are the implications of that for the hiring manager? What are the implications of that for the executive team? And how does that then result in, we're missing good candidates, we're tarnishing our brand, like we're taking up hiring managers' time. So maybe unveil the covers a little bit on your that business case as you were thinking about how did you structure it in a way that says, here's what's happening, here's the possibility, and here's the impact of that. Because I think that's connecting those dots is oftentimes the hardest part for a lot of folks.
Absolutely. So I think I still thought about the benefits in the sense of time as well, because it was like, we can make more money, we can change our circumstances in a lot of things, but we can't make more time, right? And so we have to be really effective with the time that we have. I want to make sure that we're really effective in the sense of the work-life balance for our team and our hiring managers and our leaders as well. We want to make sure that they're really efficient with the time that they have during the day so that they can get back home and spend some time with their kids or go to a sporting event or do the things that are important to them as well. But then there's also the financial piece of this. And so I kind of laid out in three arguments. One was my time. If I could be more effective and efficient in scheduling, in collecting feedback, in knowing what the next steps looked like, I could spend more time looking for really good candidates and contacting really good candidates and reaching out to really good candidates. And we could be less reliant on external headhunters and more reliant on our internal recruiter, right? And so that was a money saving piece of the puzzle. Then there was the reputation piece. We can be so much more effective telling our own story and handling the conversation or handling the dialogue that's happening around our hiring process, around our business, around our culture, around what's important to us. And so hearing that from someone who's living it every day, right? We're a Holganix customer. My husband farms, he uses Holganix. So I understand what that customer experience looks like. I'm sitting in the chair as part of the team. I'm having the conversations. I'm hearing, the decisions that are being made. I'm watching how the core values impact the decisions that we're making. And so I can have that conversation in a different way. I can control that narrative in a different way than if we're relying on someone externally to tell that story for us. And so that was important to me. And then it truly just boiled down to the sales team can go focus on meeting with growers and telling the story and, doing soil testing and mapping and all of the things that are important to commercialization and revenue versus trying to figure out where we're at with this candidate or making sure that nobody slipped through the cracks or, making sure that they emailed or sent the right candidate over. And so it was just that return to revenue generating, practices or processes or tasks was so important to me because I do work with the commercial team quite a bit. That's really, this team is growing so quickly that we're spending a lot of time and energy building out that commercial team. And for us, it was really important to, let them be out in the field doing the things that they're really good at. And so I think there's a time saving piece of that. I think that there's a just like job satisfaction piece of that. They're doing the thing that they really love to do and that they're really good at doing. And then I think for us, bottom line revenue, they're more effective in front of customers than they are in front of candidates. And so how do we put them in front of customers, the people that they're really effective and let them own that space and take some pressure off and let me own this space. And how do I do this effectively? Yeah. So those were kind of my three pieces that I really considered. And, ultimately that conversation was just
way easier than you thought it was going to be.
Way easier than it should have been. Yeah.
Well, I think the key there is yes, it's time savings, but the key is it's the reallocation of that time. It's how are you go to your CFO or your CEO, whoever it is, and you say, we're going to save time, we're going to be more efficient. And they're going to say, so what? Like, what does that mean for the organization, right? How are we reallocating that time? How is that allowing people to do their jobs better, make more money for the business, have more work-life balance, allow us to be more proactive so we can bring in better talent, all those types of things. I think it's about the reallocation is really where people miss the mark when they go for approval or try to pitch something to leadership. They stop at time savings. And it's like, that's the surface layer.
And I think there's two things that jump out to me in that, and you've kind of hinted at them. One is I'll call it death by 1,000 cuts. And then the other is the degree of confidence and the willingness to act with conviction. So the first one is, I think the biggest challenge, frankly, in a lot of workflow type settings, but in recruiting, is that it's not like there's any one thing that you can look at and say, oh, that's the thing we need to go fix. It's all of these little things that come together because it's distributed, right? Because we have different people at different times and different channels. And so it's this compounding effect of that time that is really the issue. And I think you hit on that. It's like, it's this collection of like the communication flow and things like that happen. And so articulating that as it's this compounding thing, this death by 1,000 cuts that actually collectively has a really big business impact if not done well. Then the other you really hit on when you talked about the joy in the 15-minute meeting is that as you think about business impact, getting to the right candidate and knowing it quickly, right? When you have that ability to make that communication efficient and transparent, you can almost see the confidence start to amp up. Like everybody starts to feed on each other. I'm like, oh, we got one. And then you're like, bang, let's move now before we lose this candidate. Because those candidates always have the best options. They're always the ones that have, the most number of possibilities. And so the sooner we act with conviction on that to me is a real game changer in terms of ultimate impact.
I agree.
Especially in an organization, and this is true of every organization, but we work a lot with organizations where the people are a big part of what's being bought and sold, right? The service that's delivered or the product, it's their expertise that is part of that. And so that it just amplifies. It's not just somebody doing, not shouldn't say just, but it's amplified. The person that's in that seat that has that subject matter expertise, especially if they're in front of the customer, they have an outsized impact on the organization.
Absolutely.
And Gary mentioned this about confidence, and I think that's something we should come back to in terms of just confidence in selecting the tech that you're going to use. So we've already covered here is you anchored in on some problems that needed to be solved. You were anchored in on the ATS that comes with our HRAS is not the solution. So we anchored in on a category of solutions in ATS. What's the process by which you evaluate multiple companies within one category? Because it's so easy to get lost in the sauce, if you will, of features and functionality. But the reality is, a lot of ATSs are going to do 90% of the things as the other ATSs. And so how do you find the nuance in the solution, ultimately the vendor that you're selecting, to ensure that they're going to be the right one to help you solve those problems you're hoping to solve?
Yeah. So I think for me, I had worked with a few different applicant tracking systems in my past roles. And I had worked with some that were connected to an HRIS system, some that were just the applicant tracking system. And I had a preference on working with a applicant tracking system that was maybe a little bit more standalone, but it had to integrate. And so that was one of my criteria, right? Was I want this to stand alone because I want it to have the functionality that I need. And sometimes I think the functionality gets missed when we're really focused on like the HR functions versus the actual hiring functions. And so I knew that that was a piece that was very important to me, right? It needed to have the functionality. It also needed to integrate. And so I don't want to have to manually move information from 6 different locations or 6 different software programs and pull it into, this for this and that for that. And so knowing that Spark Hire and Recruit could actually integrate into all of my systems, I could put information where I needed them. I could, get all of the things that I needed happening behind the scenes and without a lot of manual intervention was a big piece for me. I had used Spark Hire in the past. I knew how the processes flowed. I knew the automation that was available. One of the tools that I think gets a lot of talk right now is like the AI tools, and people get really excited about AI or people get really frustrated about AI. And there's a lot of big feelings around how AI can be helpful in business cases like recruiting or interviewing. And it's just that it's a tool, right? And so I can use an AI resume review within the Spark Hire Recruit platform that allows me to kind of summarize the information that's in the application or the resume. But I'm still the one, me, a human, is still the one making the decision. And that was important to me. I didn't want to be only fed a pool of candidates that was deemed acceptable by the AI resume review. I wanted to still have the ability to go through and look, at the pool and feel very confident in that decision. So I think that was a big piece. For me, it was having the stakeholders be able to have visibility and knowing that I could build out, the admin functions or the functions of my team in a way that gave them access to the information in a succinct manner, but that they didn't have so much information that it was overwhelming, or they didn't have access and, a view of information that they shouldn't have. And so I can be very understanding of the confidentiality, but also give access where it's needed. So there was just so many pieces that I think I was kind of looking at and pulling together. And I knew Spark Hire Recruit could do all of those things. I'll be completely honest with you. There were pieces of Spark Hire that I wasn't using in my previous employer. And when I went through the process of actually building out Spark Hire, and I got to work with Sonia, she was like, have you ever used this? And I was like, no, that's a great piece that I never really even considered because it wasn't part of my workflow before. And so I had the opportunity to even like learn new pieces that I didn't even take into consideration that are helping me be really effective and efficient. So for me, it was really about the tools. It was about working with a great company that I trusted. And then the integration was a big piece.
Got it. So it seems like it was a criteria of there are a few technical requirements, feature functionality requirements, like the integration with your HRAS, maybe things around how AI does or doesn't work within the platform. Like you said, it's really important for you to be making final decisions. You don't want AI acting autonomously. So maybe that's a technical requirement. But it sounds like everything else was less around this feature or that feature and more around what you were actually trying to solve for within the business, whether it was giving people the visibility that they needed to run the process you were aiming to run. So it was less about check the box of, can you do this or can you do that? It's show me how you help me solve this problem. And I think that's really where, you know, people, when they're looking at software, miss is they go in looking for specific features instead of looking to solve the problems that they need to solve, and how the software, which software solves it best for them, is really what they need to get after.
Yeah, which, coming back to the beginning of our discussion is that, well, I'm going to start by, let's just map out the process and all the who does what, when, in what system do they do it. And you start to see like, man, this is really clunky. Now I know what I'm solving for. I don't know. There's a combination of features that can do that, but it really is, I just need to synthesize communication, make it transparent, and have it be easy for the hiring manager. I'm like, great, you just framed up a set of requirements. Now you've got a foundation by which to go look at other things. And we're, as we kind of wind down the discussion here, I think it's actually a great segue to the other thing that we often see as well is that as we get into tech, especially for those you mentioned, like you had used systems in the past, but this was really the first opportunity to be implementing. And in many cases, that's a big unknown. Like you haven't been through it before, and sometimes that actually causes paralysis. It's like, I know we need to do this, but man, I'm really scared about that, especially when you're moving from one system to another and you're the one saying, this is my project, we need to do this. Like, what am I getting myself into? So as you got down that path, you didn't have the benefit of having done that before. What were some of the things that you thought about now that you've been through it? What would you recommend to your past self that your future self now knows in terms of, as I think about integration, what are the things I should prioritize? And what are the factors that we need to consider in terms of the partner that we choose?
Yes. So I think the support piece is a huge consideration. Having that, I keep referring back to Sonia, but having Sonia as, kind of my point person, she was it. It wasn't like, if you run into problems, call someone on the team and a customer service rep will be with you to help you shortly. It was like Sonia was emailing me and she was like, hey, Kate, we need to get in touch about these 6 things. And then we'll schedule our next time to talk. And if I said, you know what, Sonia, I see point 1 and point 3 are things that I'm really comfortable with. I understand that. I'm good there. She would be like, great. Have you considered XYZ? And we could go through the entire system. We could build the system. We were like screen sharing and actually building it out together. If I got to a point where I was stuck, I knew there was just one person that I could call and have that conversation with, and she could walk me through. But then, like I said earlier, there was also pieces that I didn't really know or like I hadn't used before. And so her being able to walk me through, it wasn't a demo. It wasn't like, this is how the process works. It was actually, these are options you have, and you can kind of self-serve, pick what works for your business and how you want things to, kind of workflow out, how you want that communication to look, and then build it how it works best for you. But here are some options you may not have considered. And she had the benefit of building this out with other companies. And so she could say, I see what you're doing, and I want to tell you I've seen that work, but I've seen also like there's some pitfalls here. Or I've never considered this. Have you looked at X, Y, or Z? And so just having that, person who really understood the process and understood our needs, be able to kind of bounce ideas off of me and be able to kind of give me some different options I hadn't thought of was such a huge support. It is a kind of daunting task to move to a new applicant tracking system. But at the same time, as I've already self-confessed, I'm not a very patient person. And so I had told Sonia, like, listen, we're going to pedal to the metal of this baby. Like, I would like to have it up and moving very, very quickly. And I could schedule those meetings out in a way that actually worked really well for me. And so I was having like 2 meetings a week with her so that we could really get everything moved through and we could move very, very quickly in bringing candidates over. That process can be very simple as well. We can actually do like a mass download of candidates. And so everything's there. We can kind of have that integration piece to pull candidates over. So there was just a lot of pieces that were moving very, very quickly, but having that one point person versus, go figure it out yourself and then call me if you have issues. This was a very proactive approach to onboarding and to building out the system and to making that change. And it was very guided. And so I felt like that made the entire process significantly less concerning because I didn't have to spend the time and energy to try to figure out what I didn't know. I had someone telling me, you haven't thought about this, or you haven't looked at this, or have you seen X, Y, or Z? And that guided approach just made all the difference.
Yep.
Great to hear.
Yeah.
No surprise.
No
Sonia.
surprise. Yes.
Shout out to Sonia.
Yes. And the team in that matter, because she's got a lot of support too.
For sure.
So related to that, though, I think, I would say, yes, you obviously had a lot of guidance and support, but you also came to the table with a plan, right? And I know that our team loves that, right? They really, Sonia thrives in that environment because she's able to amplify what you're doing. So, as you think about, as you were preparing for implementation, what are some of the things that you did to prepare so that when you were interfacing with Sonia, your CSM, that you were like, okay, these are my questions. This is what's important to me, so that she had context to know where to focus.
Yeah. So I will say the best thing about it, right, is that it's not a blank page. So you don't get that like paralysis of like, where do we go? There's templates built out, there's processes built out, there's pieces that you kind of pick and choose and pull from. So I knew going into it who the stakeholders were for the role. I knew how they needed to fit into the interview process in a way that would make it flow intelligently and that made sense and that would keep the information being passed in a way that was effective. I knew going into it that I wanted the communication to be very personalized and that I would have the opportunity to build out some templates that I could add to or take away from, but have a starting point. So when I email a candidate and let them know that we're moving to the next stage, I can kind of pull that template in. I can add my, comments or notes or, just little things here and there, and I can send it off and be really effective. So I knew that when I started building out those templates that I had an idea of framework of what I wanted them to say, how I wanted them to, what the voice needed to be and how I wanted them to read. So I came to Sonia with some of those, kind of pieces pulled together already. But she did such a phenomenal job of sending information in the pre-onboarding stage. So I've talked about communication between, myself and our candidates and myself and my team and our team internally. But communication, like from Spark Hire to, the client or the client back to Spark Hire. Before I even planned the implementation meeting, Sonia was sending me emails on, this is kind of the step-by-step process. These are some of the things you need to start thinking about. Here's some examples of what has worked well. Sonia had dummy accounts that she could like pull me into and show me exactly how she had set things up in the past. So I didn't have that paralysis of starting with a blank page and being like, I don't know I have all of the things in the world, right? How do I pull them in? There was kind of that starting point that made things really succinct and easy. And, we were able to make a lot of good information come together fairly quickly because we kind of had that pre-conversation and then also just a good place within the system.
Yep. And what I think, one of the challenges, like Gary said, a lot of people get paralysis when they're getting started because they just don't know that initial milestone they're trying to get to. So they look at everything that they can do or everything that they want to do. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is so much. I'm either not going to move forward with the software at all, or I'm completely overwhelmed as we get to onboarding. I think it's easier when it's an organization, like we're talking about ATS implementation. It's easier for an organization that's coming with no ATS because it's like, okay, our milestone, our objective is like, we got to get out of spreadsheets and we got to start hiring in a system. You were coming from a situation in which you had a platform, you were hiring out of software, you were working with hiring managers in there. So as you thought about your implementation of a new ATS, what was the first objective or milestone or thing that you're like, we have to get this done so we can maintain hiring continuity and we can kind of think about everything else later?
Yeah, it was just feedback. It was, well, I kind of had my 3 goals, right? Or I had my 3 situations that I needed to solve. But for me, the first order of business was collecting feedback in a way that was visible to everyone in the group, was standard in the sense that we were comparing each candidate against a set idea of, what our expectations were or what the needs of the role were, and that we were collecting feedback in one place. It wasn't a text message. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't an email. It was in the system. It was in one spot that we could all go back to. And so for me, that was this is the absolute must. First thing, got to do it. We've got to handle this. And then all of the other things we could build out and build onto. But I think when you start with the end in mind of how can I make this process, what are the pieces that would make this process really successful? And then you can start building in the how you make those pieces really successful. I think when you start with the end in mind, it gives you the tools to actually build backwards and say, okay, these are the pieces that I can pull from the system that would help me be effective and help me be more successful. And so there's just a lot of opportunity. For us, it was about ensuring that we could all be really confident and share that information. So that was where I was hammering them on.
That's such a great example of that, because to your point, Josh's point, that was the milestone that you had.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, it was a milestone that everybody could feel immediately.
Right.
And profound impact on the organization. It seems like a relatively light lift, but we get everybody in there and wow, this is so much better. And boom, that's, value created for you for the organization, right? It also helps focus where you need to spend your time, energy, and effort. To your point, it's like, okay, I know that that's important to me. So now working with Sonia, what do we have to do to make sure that that's the thing that we deliver on and really focus that effort? And to your point, it's like, and then once we have that, then we pick off what's the next thing that will really provide that impact, and just keep marching in that way. And I think, that's one of the things, back to the process that we pride ourselves on, is that we look at it as actually, yes, there's onboarding to get you up and running, but it really is just phase 1 of an annual and ongoing success plan.
Absolutely.
What are the steps, the evolution? We continue to evolve as your process evolves, because as you get there, as I'm sure you did, then all the whole company this is great. Can we do this? Yes. Can we do that? And yes, we can. So
I will tell you, we can call it onboarding. It didn't feel like onboarding. It felt like I got to bring someone else onto my team and they got to help me build this out in a way that made a lot of sense. Right. And so it wasn't an onboarding as a check the box activity. It was onboarding as a dynamic activity. I had this person who was incredibly intelligent and really good at what they did, but they got to kind of be on my team. She asked about, what problems was I trying to solve? What was important to, the business, and how do we address those things? And then she brought in other ideas. And so I almost think of, when I work with Sonia, I almost think of her as a consultant. I almost think of her as someone that's actually on my team that's helping me do this, and versus here's all of the things you can do, go figure out what you want to do. Right. So I think that it's a very dynamic experience. It's not a hypothetical,
Yeah. Start, stop project. Here you go. You're done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that is a great way to end this conversation. This was so fantastic, Kate. We really appreciate you spending the time. Just wealth of knowledge. You've been through a lot. So thankful and grateful for your willingness to share it with everybody. I think there's a lot that we can learn. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Thank you.
All right. Well, stick around just for a minute, Kate. We'll go backstage here in just a second. But for everybody, thank you for carving time out of your day to join us here. And we'll provide you the what do we call it? The key plays clips here shortly. So you get the highlights. But really appreciate you joining us on Let's Talk Hiring with Spark Hire. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.